Good morning or afternoon. Welcome to the latest edition of the Agile Dashboard with Do Corporate Education here on LinkedIn Live. My name is Joe Perfetti. I am the host of the show, and I'm pleased to have Joe Stolarski of Jones Lang LaSalle. He is the Chief Revenue Officer of their corporate solutions business. And today we're going to be talking about the future of work. JLL is one of the largest commercial office managers in the world, and the purpose of the Agile Dashboard is to help leaders understand what's next. How do we understand the future and be able to decide how responsive our organizations are able to do that? And our research at Duke has been focused on that. And I'm very pleased to have Joe here today talk to us about the uncertainty of what the office of the future looks like. And as somebody who's been managing that office space, has a lot of insight. So Joe, thank you so much for your time and welcome to our show.
Thanks for having me, Joe.
Great. And as always, we're going to have two co-panelists. They're going to help me with the conversation. They will be joining us in a few minutes. Scott Coher is the Vice President. Scott Walker is a previous guest. Scott Coher is the Vice President and Vice Dean at the Geisinger Commonwealth School of Medicine. And John Davis is a Regional Managing Director here with us at Duke Corporate Education. So they're going to be joining us back in a few minutes to engage in the conversation. I'd also encourage you, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments, and I'm happy to post them to Joe. But I want to start out with a $64,000 question. So, given COVID-19 and, what has really been the impact on the commercial market and JLL, and what can you tell us about that?
Sure. Well, obviously, it's had a big impact on the economy, and our company does reflect some of that without question. We're active in all of the markets around the world, doing transactions and capital markets work. And as you'd imagine, some of that work followed the movement of the economy. But another part of our company is our outsourcing business, which is the corporate solutions business, which continues to do well. And we're very connected to our clients, and we're able to help them with that. I think the real part there is that we were able to advise them and help them through the process with our consulting services and that sort of thing.
So just out of curiosity, what's been the biggest number one challenge that they've been asking you about to deal with in the short term?
Well, the biggest challenge that they've got is dealing with keeping their employees safe, right? And thinking through how to watch out for their best interests to begin with, and make sure that their staff that are either frontline workers can come back into the office and work well, work safely, come back to an environment that they can operate in. For some of the other office space where a lot of folks are learning how to work from home and work remotely, the challenge is providing them the technology and making their connections work. And hopefully my connection's working well with you today. We'd have a little trouble. But some of those are the bigger challenges that are facing them in the really short term.
So that's understandable. This is the short term, and I want to break this into both the short term and the long term. But obviously, as we hopefully have a vaccine, and that kind of helps our population, we're going to be coming back to the office. So as we re-engage with our traditional offices, is that going to change? Is the way that we re-engage at work going to change as we think about the future of work?
Yeah, well, I guess you really kind of have to step back a little bit to understand that what COVID has done, it's really accelerated a lot of the trends that we saw already. We saw a lot of activity in the marketplace, a lot of disruption in the marketplace hitting real estate. Managing real estate operations, large portfolio of large corp organizations is a rather complex thing, and it's had a lot of impact from technology, globalization, societal trends, all of these that have had to that are having an impact on what the outlook of the built environment is. So all of that was happening anyway, and then with the pandemic, we're seeing all of this be accelerated big time. Things are moving much faster, and they're coming much more to light quickly. And as a result, as you would imagine, the heads of real estate departments are becoming more and more relevant to the C-suite. right? The real what's happening in real estate is no longer simple. Let's house our employees and keep them happy and safe, but it's all about creating a culture. So I guess to get to the answer, what I think we're going to find as we have over the years, watching how real estate is impacting the work that's being done in this space and how it's integral to that, integral to driving productivity, driving culture. With the pandemic, that's becoming much more prevalent, and we're going to have to adapt the space to the needs of the workforce so that they can be productive and engaged and drive good work for the enterprise.
And as you see the adaptiveness, I mean, am I going to go back and work in a Manhattan skyscraper? And if so, is that environment going to look any different than where it was pre-pandemic?
Well, what we do know is that people want to get back to the office. People don't want to work from home forever. We're social animals. We want to get together. We want to see it. Management organizations, they want people to come back too. It's how you solve the biggest problems, how you drive productivity, how you create collaboration, drive innovation for an enterprise. Profitability of an enterprise requires people coming together. The good news is that employees want to come back. Having said that, I think the space is going to look different. It's going to be a little bit different. You're going to see a lot more collaboration space than you would before. We don't have old, enclosed offices much anymore, and that trend continues. We're going to have more open spaces where a lot of people are working together. But then, of course, you have to accommodate the people who need quiet time and focus time.
See, I find it interesting how you're discussing how people wouldn't think of real estate as being strategic. They wouldn't think of it as driving culture. They wouldn't think about it driving a collaborative environment. But it does sound, as you talked about the digital and other shifts that are happening, in a way, are just accelerating these changes towards the workforce of the future. And so I imagine that's going to really, as you said, it's already changing in the way people are setting up the environments differently for when people come back.
Yeah, that's right. You think about the workforce and how their needs are changing. We have to adapt the workplace to meet those needs. We've learned a lot during this pandemic, haven't we? We've learned about how we drive our own productivity individually, but then also how to work with teams. So you're going to see a lot more changes in the space of how to accept these people, meet their needs. I think one of the things that we're finding also is that more and more employees want to see more work-life balance. It's always been a priority, right? The priority where employees felt like they wanted to maintain some balance, and with the pandemic, they're recognizing some of the benefits of being able to work remotely and working in the office. And we've always had a work from home policy around most organizations. Those are getting rewritten today. And so what we're finding is that people are really treasuring that work-life balance. So we have to accommodate that.
So and I appreciate hearing some of these perspectives. So if I'm thinking about an office, then do my employees have one employee to one desk in one office, or do I have to kind of even think about how I'm managing the actual office space differently for the employees that are coming in?
Yeah. The days of one employee with one office with one desk, that's pretty old thinking. There's certainly organizations that require that, depending on the kind of industry you're in, right, and depending what you're doing, what kind of work you're in. But for the most part, if you think about it, it's really more about the work and the output of the work, and showing up for the office is not work. The output of what you're creating and what you're innovating is the work. So we have to create spaces that allow people to sit down, do quiet time, but also collaborate, but then also in a large team, and also to meet up in small rooms with small teams. But then, of course, digital. We have to maintain connection to the outside world for other offices, for the global platform that you might be working in. All of that has to come together in the space.
So as we talk about long-term trends, one of the other important long-term trends we're seeing in the corporate world is this notion of ESG, environmental, social, governmental scorecards, and an improved focus on sustainability for the business. So Where does the sustainability fall in terms of, the priorities for the changes in the long term that JLL is seeing? And are you seeing a shift in what the clients are looking for related to sustainability?
Yes, we're all seeing it in the news, right, every day. And I think it's another one of these situations of acceleration where we've fundamentally been very strong with sustainability as a company. It's fundamental to the purpose of why we exist as a company. We feel that that's core. Our purpose as a company is to shape the future of real estate for a better world, and sustainability is at the core of that. So we've been pushing and advancing that cause for a long time. And with the pandemic, we're finding organizations doubling down in this space. I think it's a combination of two things. One, in addition to providing a safe, secure, productive work environment, the real estate departments are also trying to find out how to do it cheaper, less expensive. How do I drive out costs, be more effective, more efficient across the board? So, and energy consumption is part of that. I mean, 40% of the total carbon emissions come from the built environment, right? So that's
Sorry,
fundamental.
one more time. It sounds like a really important stat. Explain that one to me again one more time.
So if you think about the total carbon emissions around the world, 40% of that comes from the built environment, from buildings. And that's the business we're in. So we recognize our role in doing that, and our clients who own, occupy, invest in that real estate feel the same way, and we're finding them spending more and more time on it. I think the pandemic also put a spotlight on it again, in that we're seeing changes, right? We're seeing changes in the environment through reduced travel, reduced occupancy of buildings, and that sort of thing that is actually impacting what's happening in the environment. And I think a lot of the management is saying, hey, there's something we can do here, and let's recommit to this. The C-suites are recommitting to the desire to do that.
So, what are some of the more innovative things that you've seen some of your clients do to kind of drive sustainability, to reduce these emissions that maybe we can learn from?
Well, there's an old saying, the most sustainable building you could possibly have is the one you don't build, right?
Yeah.
So I think what we're finding is people are trying to repurpose the real estate, think about it in a different way, and get to the outcomes that the organization is trying to create, rather than just constantly expanding or building without thinking about it more broadly. There's a whole roadmap that needs to be considered when you think about your carbon footprint and how to get to net zero. And there's a lot there. There's all kinds of new technology that comes across that allows us to manage buildings differently, but also how to use this space differently.
So what that sounds like is that your business model is truly changing, and your operating model is changing. I mean, you can't just be considered a REIT anymore. So how is JLL transforming its business to adapt to this environment?
Yeah. So our business model, it puts our clients' interests first. We're a services company. We manage large corporate organizations, real estate portfolios, and help them through all that. The pandemic, the trends over the last number of years has focused us on the work, the future of work, and helped the real estate departments manage that expectation within their own enterprise. So I think the shift that we're seeing more than anything is around real estate departments not just managing what the space is, what the portfolio of the buildings are like, but more about what's happening in the buildings, back to the culture, back to the productivity, back to engaged employees. For years, we've been pushing to focus on talent. I mean, space has always been a consideration when attracting the best talent, right? And it's a big part of why people join companies is the kind of space they have. And so that's always been the case. And our business model has been shifting in that direction. A couple of years ago, we entered a transformation of our business to focus on our clients, to focus on that work. In addition to that, we globalized a lot more of our operations, created a whole new products organization that's focused on that outcome, changed a lot of our business engagement, deal structures, on the outcomes towards work. So those sorts of things.
Sorry, my mic got muted by mistake. I'd like to bring John and Scott into this conversation as well. I know that they've been listening here, and obviously, you both talk a lot about culture in your work and your research and leadership. John, you've been listening to this. Did you have any thoughts?
I do. So, Joe, thank you for this. It's been a great conversation so far, and it is intriguing what you're doing at JLL and the transformation you're facing. And I'm intrigued by one of the points you mentioned about old thinking versus new thinking, right? No longer one desk, one office. And I think it also applies to a certain extent in leadership over this past year as we look at what the pandemic has wrought upon everybody. And in that regard, what have you learned as a leader? Is there some new thinking that has even surprised you perhaps in this? And are there lessons you can share that also pertain to what's going on in the industry and across JLL about the future of work?
Yeah, sure. It's interesting. One of the big items to consider when thinking about shaping a space, a workplace around the workforce, is the management of that team. The enterprise, the management team needs to think differently about what they expect of employees, how they're going to engage them, how they're going to put them to work. If a hybrid workforce is the future, which is what we're seeing, a hybrid where there's a combination of working in the office and working anywhere, their management teams are going to have to think that through a little bit differently. And you have to be a little bit more forward thinking and thoughtful about what outcomes you're going to get to, rather than keeping your finger on top of an employee all the time. All right. And that's more elevated kind of management anyway. For me personally, I think that leading a global team from a laptop, in your bedroom is not fun, and it's not easy. It's not the way we wanted to do things. But you did really have to learn about change management. You really had to think through about how you're going to adapt. It changed the way we prioritize things. It changed the way we work together. We've adopted new technology to the electronic whiteboards and those sorts of things that allow us to move forward. But I think the larger lesson learned is really what how management has to deal with their staff, because they can't have them around you all the time.
So Joe, when you were answering that question, Joe, sorry, Scott,
Yep.
in the chat, somebody had a related question about the cost side of this. So if we can bring this up from Todd Taylor, and he just had a question about accommodating the flexible work and schedule to put demands on property managers associated with the cost associated with this. I'll let you kind of read that question. Mm-hmm. Just curious if you also leadership lessons or thoughts on that.
Yeah, I don't think there's going to be an additional cost to accommodate this, to run a building. There are some cases where we might have to take on more space to create more either distancing, or to create larger collaboration space, or to meet new work-life balance issues, for sure. So there might be some portfolio level costs. In terms of property management, to that question, in the staff required, I think the experience that we create in space, it's about that experience, can be done with effectively the same size staff that you have today. And I'd like to think that we're going to even become a little bit more efficient in our operations. And so some of the costs of running a facility will continue to get more efficient.
No, thanks for that. Scott, sorry to interrupt you. I know you were about to ask a question.
No problem. Great conversation, Joe. Thank you. So, I'm thinking about the innovative combinations you might come up with. So what we're learning is that, the space that I'm in now, has a computer and a television and a couch and a dog and, maybe more dogs than I need. But as you think with your team about what are those combinations of spaces that are on the horizon, the question that I have for you is, do we have enough built space? Are we at a point when you're thinking about carbon emissions, do we have enough space? Do we need more space? Or will the combinations of how we think about and use space change the way we think about, do we have enough? Mm-hmm. What do you see on the horizon?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think a lot of my colleagues are going to miss my dogs as we get back into the office that are usually, over my shoulder in my home office. but I mean, it's a very large question. Or do we have enough space? I mean, as the economy continues to grow and the need for more space, I think will continue to rise. It's hard for anyone to suggest that I think we probably have enough. I think I wouldn't expect that development is going to stop by any means. I would say, I mean, and it's a very interesting industry, isn't it? I mean, you can see how spaces are being repurposed and how office buildings are now incorporating hotels, now incorporating, a live, work, play kind of an environment in more and more buildings. We're seeing some more shifts between the urban to the suburban and flow where more headquarters are moving out again. But that doesn't mean they will move back in again. The younger generation loves being in the city as much as, and they love being in the office and they want to be together. So far be it from me to suggest that we're not going to continue to grow, because I think we will. I think just the way we use the space is going to be different.
Yeah. I agree with you. In fact, part of why I asked the question is because I can imagine actually a boom or a growth phase where those combinations are very different. Live, learn, work. You said it. Packages with corporations are going to become different. Expectations are going to become different. That's right. And I think if you think generically about the space, there's a hybrid workforce that is going to want to be in the office part of the time and work elsewhere part of the time, right? That's always going to happen. It's always been happening. It's just going to continue to develop in that area. And then in this space, the days of cubicles upon cubicles and offices and everyone's head down, it really doesn't work anymore. You think about it in kind of three major categories: quiet space, small team space, and then large collaboration space. Yeah, that's great.
All right, John, you look like you wanted to say something?
Yeah. So I want to follow up because, Joe, you mentioned a couple of times this idea of experience and getting people to think about your role at JLL and experience. And it leads to a little bit what Scott just asked, but also the question of culture that Joe tapped into earlier, Joe Perfetti. And I'm wondering if part of what you're seeing now is this movement toward a less tangible and more intangible consultative approach in working with clients.
Well, as we continue down the future of work path, we have to combine our bricks and mortar and our hard technical skills of our organization with what we think the future of work is going to be and how to advise that organization to get there. So there's definitely a combination of both that has to get us to that place. And we have to think about the human experience. How do humans want to act? How do they want to interact? And how does that marry up with the enterprise and what they're hoping for that group of humans to do, right, in that workspace? So it's fascinating. It's a complex industry, no doubt, because there are many components to real estate operation that have to come together to make things work and work efficiently and safely and productively. But then when you think more broadly about what the work is going to be and how that talent needs to be put to work, it gets even more complex.
Yeah.
Well, the other question then that this leads to, Joe, is, part of our show's name is the Agile Dashboard, and we're trying to understand some of the leading metrics that are helping us understand those future changes. So has your dashboard changed? Are the metrics that you're using to evaluate performance shifting?
Yes, they are. As a company, as an enterprise, our business is to serve our clients and earn revenue and fee for doing that kind of work. And as their work changes and as what we want them to do and what we're helping them do, the way we get compensated and we drive our business changes, of course. I think when you think about real estate operations, I've mentioned it's kind of complex in the past, earlier today, and it is. And there are so many metrics that you can follow. And there's so many dashboards that have been developed over the years to see how a portfolio is actually performing. And everything from leasing data to building operations data to your mortgage on the property that you might be holding, all the way through to occupancy data and where people are working. So there are so many pieces here, and when you look at the performance of that, you can come up with many. We've done a lot of work around metrics that matter. So what is important, what to expect of that, and that those sorts of metrics also do drive our business. I think one of the clever things that we've helped clients think about is our 330-300 model, and just to kind of put some of the metrics in a simple form. $3 a foot is what it takes to operate a building, utilities. $30 a foot to rent that space, and then $300 a foot is maybe the cost of the workforce in that space. Now, obviously, these are general terms, and that happens. It varies around the world, but it gives you an order of magnitude of the difference. And so, while we're in there measuring metrics around that $3 and $30, we're also trying to get people to focus again back to the work and the $300, and how do we drive that change? And back to your point earlier around how real estate's being looked at as an investment for the enterprise.
Yeah, I really appreciate the that context, because I think people underestimate how much the people side of the investment is actually being made, because it's about a factor of 10 relative to the real estate side. But it's the combination that matters. But I think we just saw another question by Andy Billingsley that came up, and this gets back to a question you were asking earlier. And Scott was asking about the balance, about building, supply and demand in the overall market. Are we going to see, particularly in certain markets, surpluses of office space as we evolve out of the current culture?
Well, I think that if you do a quick search right now, you'll find that there's more space available than there has been in the past. That's a reflection of the past year and what's been happening with the economy and people shifting. And there are cases of organizations doing that for sure. Then there are a lot of organizations and industries that are expanding, taking up that space. It's not too different from other cycles we've seen where the space is made available and then picked up by another. I think it's difficult to suggest at a general level that there's going to be a lot of surplus. It's definitely shifting and changing. And I made the mention about the urban to the suburban, and then suburban to urban, and watching the town flow and where that goes. I think that's what you really want to look at, rather than maybe the short term movement of a few companies.
Great. Scott, John?
Yeah, Joe, I'm still on this. What will the combinations be? So, when you talk about management changing their view of how they work with folks, and, all of us have Zoom fatigue, and I imagine that your consultants and space designers are in very high demand. But this may be an opportunity for some real issues to be taken on. Social determinants of health, one of which is space. Where do you put people? It might be an interesting time for a conversation about, is it cheaper, better, safer to have people in space than not in space, especially if it's a distinct combination, a living, learning, working environment. Mm-hmm. When you think about some of your, bleeding edge ideas, what comes to mind beyond having to manage differently about that, health and well-being of the workforce?
Yeah, well, commuting time, right, is another point to your point, and we have to watch what happens with commuting, and this is a global issue. And many people have to commute through difficult times to get to the office, to be with their coworkers and operate. So I think what we'll find that more and more companies will try to create spaces that are maybe closer to the employees, and more pods and hubs. Again, I think we're going to find a lot of pods and hubs in Manhattan and large cities with high rises. So that's going to work too. But I think the other really big consideration is what the new demands of the employees are. They're looking for a more socially conscious company to work for. They want to see that in their buildings, in the space that they use. They are looking for healthy lifestyles. They're we're working to make sure that the workplaces become more in line with those demands of the workforce, and the pandemic has brought that to front more quickly. It's always been nice to be able to pop out and get a workout in for an hour, and can I do that when I come back to the office, and will the space be changing to allow me to do that, and is that going to be made available to me? I think these are the kinds of things that you're going to see come more readily available, that begins to mimic a lot of what we've been experiencing as we've been working remotely.
So Joe, our time unfortunately is coming quickly to an end. I do have to see one more question in the audience, again, about sort of a short-term, long-term perspective. Do you see people that are just saying, we want to do a bunch of short-term leases, or are they still willing to commit long-term in this market? Thoughts on just the general prevailing winds?
This is really not my area of expertise. I'm going to be honest with you right there. Okay. So let me be clear. But what we're seeing is that there's been a bit of a shift anyway in the marketplace to provide more flexibility, right? And the super long-term leases are still there for sure, but they've been coming shorter anyway. And I don't know that there's as much of an impact on the terms of those leases as a result of the pandemic or most recent events. But I think just generally people are looking for that flexibility.
Sure. So as we wrap up, Joe, just any final message that you would give to leaders of companies based on your experience and knowledge that they should just be thinking about, that they're not thinking about going forward?
Yeah, I think. Thanks for that question. This is not over, right? Everybody's asking for what's the new normal going to be, and what I would say is that we're going to be with the phrase "always on transformation." Things will continue to evolve and continue to change. So let's be prepared for those changes that are coming, and that will continue to come, and be ready. So that means we have to be very agile, and we have to be very resilient. And we have to think more broadly about what we're accomplishing, what the outcome is for what you're working on. And in our space, I keep coming back to the work and to what the employees are looking to accomplish and what those outcomes are. So I would say staying focused on that and kind of stepping back and watching it. Of course, resiliency, that was huge, and being prepared and thinking through these events and being able to respond as needed. I guess the only other thing I would add is the value of relationships and getting to know people. I feel bad for so many employees who have been hired over the last 9 months and never been into the office, right? And how they don't have a feel for the culture of a company, and it comes down to the individual relationships that you build with people, which becomes the culture of the company and advances that for the long term, which I think is huge and large equity to an organization, is that culture.
Yeah. The thing that's been most interesting for me about this conversation is just, how most people don't approach real estate as driving innovation, as driving collaboration, as providing a basis for culture and connection. And yet it's so critical. And if nothing else, I think having it taken away from us so abruptly in the COVID world has made us realize how important it can be. And as we go forward, to really leverage that knowledge to create the better workforce environment of the future. So I really thank you for some of the thoughts that you shared today. And again, if anybody would like to learn more about what Joe has been saying, feel free to reach out to him at JLL. You can also, if you want any more information about what we've been talking about, particularly concepts about agility, fragility, etc. We have a course at Duke CE called Building Strategic Agility, which we're happy to talk to you about. And so again, feel free to reach us at dukece.com. But again, Joe, thank you for your time today. I want to thank our panelists, Scott and John, and thank you for listening. And always look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Agile Dashboard. So again, we'll end our show today, and have a good day, everybody. Stay safe out there.
Thanks everybody.
Bye-bye.
Joe.
Thank you.